So today we are doing lesson 8. I know last week I said lesson 6. It's because I did 2 lessons 5s, just so you know. Today technically we're on lesson 8. And secondly, I told everyone on their little calendar to read 11 and 12. 12 would be future. Except for when I was creating the lesson, it would be better if I did 11 and chapter 11 and chapter 13.
Wait, why are we back at lesson 8?
Well, we're starting lesson 8.
Lesson 8, this is lesson 8.
Oh.
So the calendar should be in the back of your book, in the back folder. Back folder. Right there. Josh, you see it? That's it. It's in the little. The calendar will tell you where we are and what we've covered. The only difference is I switched 12 and 13. Because it'll make total sense while I go through this, because it's like covering 2 birds with 1 stone.
Wait, so what chapter is it?
11 and 13.
For this week?
Okay, so we'll begin looking at our vocabulary. It looks like a lot, but if you look at chapter 13, if you look at chapter 13 vocabulary, you'll see it's present tense on the left side, and on the right is going to be in the aorist tense, which we'll cover that later in the lesson.
Why is devil crossed out in the placement?
Oh yeah, so daimonion, yeah. That's, well, I personally like the translation demon better than devil, because diabolos is devil. And whereas this is more translated as demons or demon. And then also the hutos right here. You'll see thus, so, and in this manner. 99.9% of the time it's going to be in this manner. Or it's going to have that meaning behind it. You can use thus, so, but have in the back of your mind it means in this manner. Or in this way. It's usually done like, in this way this will be accomplished, if that makes sense. Remember that un here, it's in your vocabulary, kind of got it cut off here, but it's post-positive, so it's going to come after the first word, or the first set of words. So keep an eye out for that. It won't show up at the very beginning.
Wait, though. Post-positive means it comes after you actually would have put it in your English translation?
So in Greek, it's going to be after. In English, it's going to be therefore, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But in Greek, it could be...
Greek can be something else.
Yeah. It could be like a phrase. It could be one word. Just look out for that. Generally, the verse division is helpful in narrowing that down. So that helps. So let's just say the 11.1 vocabulary. I try to make it bigger. Is that bigger than last time?
Yes.
Because I noticed that.
Your arrow is also nice.
Huh?
Your arrow is nice.
That's nice.
Oh yeah, it is a little nice little touch, isn't it? I got a lightsaber too.
Can you angle it different? Yeah, use that. Leave it as that.
Lightsaber.
Okay. So the first one, under 11. Apothnesco. Apokteno. Apokteno. We're going to get this apokteno. Biblion. Daimonion.
Oh, that sounds like
Decamai. Heritas. Or herete, sorry, herete. I don't know where I got the os at the end. Eti. Hetoimazo. I'm getting tongue-tied already. Thalassa.
TH, James.
I know, you're throwing me off over there. Therapuo.
Ooh, that's there.
Catharizo. Noon. Un. Hutos. Pistuo. Ploion. Praso. Scatia. Staros. And Tate.
What, I got lost. What does noon mean? The word
Now.
now?
Noon. Now. And un is therefore.
Yeah, because I was thinking noon is, like, is that where we got our English word noon for, like, lunchtime?
No.
Now, James.
Our English word new came from French,
Oh, but
meaning a bad word. Not really a bad word, but not a very kind word. Okay, and then the one on the left-hand side is going to be a lot of repetition of what we already covered, so I'm not going to say those. If there's a new one, like sozo, which is at the very bottom, there he goes. Sozo. And pharaoh, which is underneath that. Can you say pharaoh? Not the king of Egypt, but means I bear.
Latin for iron.
Huh?
Latin for like iron.
I don't know my Latin. This is pistuo and pipto. I think those are new for you guys.
Iron is caffeine.
Yeah. And we're going to cover this section right here when we get later into the lesson. We got lots of slides, so we're going to have to kick up the pace. Yep, lots of slides. So, imperfect active indicative. So, today we're going to be covering the imperfect and aorist, and we're going to start off by looking at the imperfect active. And by imperfect and aorist, we're also going to look at the active and middle and passive voice, just so you know. But we're going to start off with the active voice. Remember all that from last time? Okay. Don't give me hope, but that's fine. So there's a couple things we have to remember. The first thing we have to remember is the Greek verb has primary tenses and secondary tenses. Right now, you guys have learned the primary tenses, and today we're going to learn the secondary tenses. So primary tenses have the present, future, and perfect tenses, and the secondary tenses have the imperfect, aorist, and pluperfect tenses. So the reason why we're doing imperfect and aorist is because they're going to have the same endings at the end of the word, if that makes sense. So it kind of helps out. So if you remember, the present tenses, or present active indicative for luo is luo, lues, lue, luamen, luete, and luusi. The tenses would be the suffixes, which would be the o, ace, a, men, te, usi. And today, we're learning the secondary. And this is it right here. So you can say it after me. Ready? Noon, or nu, sigma, nun, min, te, nu. So let's do it together. Noon, nu, sigma, nun, min, te, nu. Nu, sigma, nun, min, te, nu. Easy?
Say or san.
San? I'll show you that later.
So the plural first and second person are the same as our present active.
Yeah, so the singular first person and the plural third person are going to be similar in the imperfect. So it's context is what's going to tell you. Yeah. So the imperfect tense. The Greek verb has 3 secondary tenses, which we've already talked about. But the main thing I want you to understand is that the imperfect tense expresses continuous and progressive action in the past, and it is only found in the indicative mood. So that's really helpful, especially when we learn all the other moods. So the imperfect is only found in the indicative. But the main thing I want you to understand is that it's It's kind of like the present tense, how it's continuous. It could be a habitual type thing, but it's things that happen in the past. And that's the main thing you need to understand is it happens in the past. So usually the helping verb would be like instead of I am doing this, I was doing this. If that makes sense. Got it? Kind of the easiest way to teach this is just looking at the verbs. So if you're on page 76, we're going to look at just kind of how the imperfect verb is created. So what is the present active indicative first singular of luo, or lu? Oh, yeah, luo. Luo, yes. So if we're going to write this on here, let me make this really big. We're going to go luo, right? And we know that it's a present active indicative because we can divide it. We have the lexical morpheme, right? And we have the person number suffix, correct? Everyone understand that? I'm going off with the basics, then we're going to jump to the kind of the bigger stuff with the imperfect. So now, if we are thinking about what we just learned, noon, sigma, nu, sigma, nun, min, te, noon, right? Nu. I don't know why I keep saying noon, but it's nu. So if we are going to do a, let's say, imperfect active indicative, first person singular, we would expect a noon at the end. Oops. Make that thicker. Here we go. However, you're going to want a what's called a the neutral morpheme right there. So it's going to be omicron before a mu and a nu, and it's going to be epsilon before all the other endings. Okay? However, there's another thing that we need to know about secondary tenses. Since they're in the past tense, there's going to be a epsilon at the very beginning of the word. So if we were to divide this up a little bit, we got this. This is going to be the past tense morpheme. This is going to be the lexical morpheme. This is going to be the neutral morpheme. And this is going to be the person number suffix. Easy? Well, that's all I got. I wish I could, maybe I could do it this way. There we go, that's easier. So, let's try it with another one. Someone pick a person number. Let's pick a person number. First, second, third, singular, plural. Pick one.
Third first.
Third first?
That's it. I actually meant to say third person singular.
Third person singular? Okay, so that'd be a nu, sigma, nun, right? So we're looking for a nun, which means there's nothing there. So there's going to be no ending. However, it could have a movable noon or nu. I don't know why I keep saying noon. It's nu. And then, because it's a secondary tense, it's going to have a epsilon at the beginning. Pretty simple.
Secondary.
So remember how there's primary tense, which is in the present, future, and perfect, and then
remind me which are.
And the secondary tense would be imperfect, aorist, and pluperfect.
They have the epsilon before the.
Yeah. So pretty much, everything in the secondary tense is going to have epsilon in it at the very beginning. So that's that. Now, if you look at under 11.3, I mean, starting where it says verbs beginning with a vowel. You see that? It's like halfway down under eluon. It's on in the very middle of that first paragraph under 11.3. You see it? Verbs beginning with a vowel. Let me know you got it. Everyone got it? Okay, so verbs beginning with a vowel lengthen that vowel, forming what is called a temporal augment. This process is really contracting, but so anything that has a like akuo, which is, everyone knows what that means? So akuo, which I hear, okay? Well, it has an alpha at the very beginning, right here, right? Well, to make this an imperfect, you have to add a epsilon right here, but what happens is that these two contract, which we're going to learn that contracting rule when we get to chapter 17, and what happens is this turns into a eta. So it would be a ku, and then we wanted to do the neutral morpheme, and then whatever ending. Okay. So that's one thing you need to keep an eye out. So if you look at this right under what I was just saying, omicron lengthens to omega, and the alpha and the epsilon lengthen to an eta. And I think the diphthongs, the alpha and the iota, I do a eta with the iota subscript, and the epsilon iota is a eta with the subscript, and omicron with the iota is a omega with the subscript. So it's basically, if the omicron turns into omega, the alpha and the epsilon turn into a eta, and if there's an iota at the end for a diphthong, that iota is going to drop under and be an iota subscript. Does that make sense? So if you look at 11.3, you just have to be aware of that. I'm not expecting you to memorize that. I just want you to be aware of it when you're wondering, why does the alpha turn into an eta? Well, you can think, oh, we learned that in this class, and we can go back. The second thing, which is in the second paragraph, a rough breathing mark appearing on the initial vowel or diphthong is retained in the augment. So if the alpha has a rough breathing mark, the eta would be a rough breathing mark also. Does that make sense? Because the alpha would turn into, with the epsilon would turn into an eta, but the rough breathing mark stays. That doesn't change. And compound verbs, remember compound verbs when we learned about the prepositions? Like ek balo, ek means out or from, and balo means I throw. Well, you put those together, I throw out. Got that? That's a simple one anyway. Well, when they are, so let's do ek balo. So when they form into a imperfect, what happens is the preposition stays, and the past tense morpheme will actually go into in between the compound verb. So it'd be like that. However, this kappa is going to actually change, which we'll learn that rule later into a Z. Yeah. So you have the ball, and then we don't need that anymore. We change it to whatever ending. If we want to do second person a singular, we would do a epsilon and a sigma. Because nu sigma, none. So does that make sense? You don't.
You were throwing out
you were throwing out. Yes. Good job. So,
And also with the vocabulary from 9:1, I kill, or actually from 11, the first two, I kill and I think as I die, they both have the away from preposition at the beginning. Apo, is that the same thing as this here?
And
At least they both begin with the first.
yeah, so just because it looks like it doesn't mean it is one. Yeah, but like if you look at chapter 10 vocabulary, apokrinomai, apo right there definitely would be I. So it's a case by case.
Okay.
Depends on the root, which we'll learn a little bit about that today when we learn about the aorist. Because there's about 300 roots, maybe 400 roots in the Greek, and all words are derived from that. So if you are able to memorize the roots, theoretically you can know or guess with close accuracy what the meaning of each word is. If that makes sense. Is there anything else? Oh yeah, on page 77, if you look at that, under number 4, the imperfect of echo, which is I have, is irregular. This is something you don't have to memorize just now, but just to be familiar with it when you come across it. It's a pretty common word. So you would expect a epsilon added to it, and epsilon plus epsilon, you would with what I told you earlier on page 76, you would expect a eta, but what happens is it's actually a epsilon and iota, which makes the same sound. So instead of that, it's going to be and instead of that ending, it's going to be acon instead of echo. Or any questions? I'm just basically throwing out rules that the epsilon at the very beginning, the past tense morpheme, can throw you for a loop on some words. Just be aware that there's lengthening that happens. I think that's it for that slide. I think so. So if we look at this, we could say this after me. It's the luo paradigm for both present and imperfect. So here we go. Luo, lues, lue, luamen, luete, luusi, eluan, elues, elue, eluamen, eluete, eluan. Pretty simple. So just be aware that, no, that's not what I want. Be aware that this one and this one look alike. The only way you're going to know the difference is by context. Cool? Yep, and that's that. Oh yeah, I was going to... So again, the easiest way is putting it in past tense. Says instead of present would be I am. Let's say I am loosing. It would be I was loosing. You were loosing. He, she, it was loosing. We were, you were, they were loosing. So it's basically, and so the am or is, it's was or were. That's just a key thing to note when you're translating. This is making that into a past tense to be verb. Cool? Secondly, remember chapter 7 when we went over the ame verb, which is the most important verb in the whole entire New Testament and Old Testament Greek. But this verb looks different in the imperfect, and it's just something that you need to memorize. This is going to be on page 78 under 11.5, I would just be aware that the one that always threw me for a loop, just on my own personal, is this one right here. Amen. I always got it confused with amen. Truly, truly was amen, amen. What Jesus says. Anyway, it's my own thing that I always messed up. But the difference is this is a eta instead of alpha. Anyway, that's something to memorize. Any questions? Okay, now we're going to look at the aorist. Funner. So the aorist is a secondary tense, but unlike the imperfect, it does not express progressive action. Rather, it simply indicates that an action took place in the past.
So that would just be like, I did something.
Yeah, so like instead of I am loosing or I was loosing, I loosed. Right? The aorist corresponds generally to the English simple past tense, which is formed in one of two ways. In English, the verbs normally form the past tense by adding the ed, like I helped instead of I help. However, like English, Greek does the same thing. Words like I made or I make. Or what's another one? I saw, I see. The internal changing in the word. I'm trying to think of another one. Say it again?
I've seen. Would that count?
I've seen, yeah. Well, that's, yeah. I've seen.
Like I bring, I brought.
Yeah, bring, I brought. That's another one.
I help.
Awake. Awoke. Wake, woke. So just like English does that, and it's really hard to know, the only way you're going to know in Greek is by knowing the vocabulary or looking it up when you're doing your devotion. And so we're going to cover that irregulars later, but right now we're going to cover the normal one. So aorist tense has the same thing. Secondary tenses, nu, sigma, non, men, te, noon. The main difference, though, is that this singular first person actually drops out. So it's it's kind of like another none, but there's a word. The word itself changes. So if we turn to page 89, under 13.3, page 89. So the imperfect of luo would be an epsilon for the past tense, and like eluon for was it first person singular? However, in the aorist, it's going to be a sigma alpha. And there's going to be nothing there. So it'd be elusa. And if we were to break this out into its morphemes, now I do it differently than what your book says, so I'd recommend this way. So you have the past tense morpheme, you have the lexical morpheme, and this is the aoristic morpheme. So if you look at your book under 1, it'll say you have the E for augment, plus lu, which is the stem, plus the sigma, which is the aorist tense, plus the alpha, which is the connecting vowel, and then you have the personal endings. I would say that the sigma and the alpha should be together because it only happens in the aorist tense. And it's just an easy way to recognize the aorist tense, the sigma alpha. If you were to just say it's the sigma, the problem with that is when we learn about future, the sigma is what helps you understand that this is a future. Cool? So instead of confusing later on when we look at future, it's just, even though the epsilon is here, but it's better just to say, look, sigma alpha, good to go. Got it? I'm trying to make this simple because it's a lot of things to memorize. So if you have any questions, let me know. So if you look at 13.3, you see elusa, elusas, eluse, elusamen, elusate, and elusan. And under singular third person, you'll notice that there's no alpha there. See that? The reason why is because if there was an alpha there, it would be the same as the first person singular. Now, usually they don't like the confusion within the same category. So singular, and they don't want anything similar in there. Now, if it was singular, like the imperfect, you know how the first person singular and the third person plural are the same? Well, those are in two different categories. You have plural and singular. Well, under singular, they don't want to get that confused, and instead the alpha drops out and the epsilon is added as a connecting or neutral morpheme. Does that make sense? I'm going slow because I want to make sure everyone gets it. So we would expect it to be an epsilon sigma alpha because there's nu sigma none. But because the first person singular is this, they don't want to confuse that. And instead, they do an epsilon. That's basically what I'm trying to say.
So for this an imperfect, when would the nu be added in?
So the noon. So again, the movable noon is there either at the end of the sentence or if the next word begins with a vowel. And often, more than not, it's just there. So it's not something to be aware of. Got it? Cool. Let's see here. So let's look at the second aorist. So the second aorist, this is what I was talking to you about, the change in I bring, I brought, I see, I saw. You know how in English the internal of the word changes instead of adding ed at the end. Like I bake, I baked, or I help, I helped. Well, same thing in Greek, the internal changes. So the second aorist is sometimes called the strong aorist, and it is recognized by the spelling of the stem, which is usually the root of the verb. So that's pretty important to know. The second aorist usually reveals the root of the verb. That's pretty helpful in the long term if you want to continue studying Greek and memorizing words. But so usually the root of the verb itself. Once you have determined that you have the second aorist form of the verb, you can find the stem by removing the augment, or it's the past tense form morpheme, and the personal ending, which is the person number suffix. You cannot determine from the lexical form of a verb whether it is a first or second aorist. So that's pretty important. So basically, when you're looking at the word, you're not going to really know if it's first or second. The only way you're really going to know is if you consult your vocabulary, your lexicon, dictionary, or there's a principal part list, which is kind of like the very last page of your book. I put one of those in there. That's really the only way you're going to know. So if you look at this page 90, you'll see the second aorist. So not all words have first aorist, and not all words have second aorist. But some words do have both, which we'll talk about that later. But if you look at under 13.4, under 1, you'll see the word lepo, which is I left, or I leave, I should say. And it's this is the present tense. However, if you look at the chart below, something is missing. We would expect the epsilon at the very beginning, the past tense morpheme, and we also expect the person number suffix plus the neutral morpheme, the connecting vowel. But there's something that happens in the very middle. Do you notice any difference? You have to look at on page 90. Yeah, the epsilon is dropped. So often cases of the second aorist, something inside of the word drops. So a good example is on your vocabulary on page 87. If you look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 from the bottom, lombano, which is I take, I receive. Well, if you scroll over to the right, you see elaban. Well, the mu is missing. So on page 87, on the vocabulary, you see lombano, which means I take, I receive. And you see elaban right next to it. The mu is missing out of that. Another one, I don't know if it's on here. Yeah. The one, montano, which is I learn. Well, if you scroll over to the right, it's emathan. So the nu is missing, along with the alpha and the nun at the end. Makes sense? So moth is actually the root word, and it's actually the same root word we get our word mathematics from, which means to learn. Did you know that? Yeah. Huh? Yeah. So, like Eli pointed out, the epsilon drops, and we have elipon or elipon instead of lepo. Cool. And the main difference is we have the past tense morpheme, that, and basically this thing drops out. This is the neutral morpheme, person number suffix, and this is really it's called the root or the stem, but you can also call it lexical morpheme. Any questions? So again, the only way you're going to know the difference between the first aorist and the second aorist is either knowing the word or looking it up. But how you will know, so basically if you were to look at this by itself, it looks almost like the imperfect, doesn't it? Elipon? Otherwise you don't know, right? It looks like an imperfect. If you remember, because there's no sigma alpha there. Oops. Which is what we would expect for an aorist, because that's one of the things that we would look for. So if you look at comparing page 90 with page 76, fold them side by side. Eluon, elipon, you don't really see how you're going to be able to distinguish it. So this is why either knowing the word or looking up is very important. See what I'm talking about? Okay, I think I can see here. Yep, case on that. Okay, the second hard part about all of this is aorist has irregular verbs. They just something you're just gonna have to. It's one of the exceptions to everything, and something you just have to learn. So because of the historical development of the Greek language, some second aorist forms are entirely different from their present tense forms. For example, the second aorist of lego, remember what lego is? I say. Well, the second aorist of that is apon, which is I said, right? It kind of happens in English too. If I go somewhere, you want to put that in past tense, I say I went. Yeah. So it's just the idea is that actually two words combine. They're actually separate words. So the present tense of went would be wind. I went around the corner. There's in one poem I read not too long ago. W-E-N-D instead of W-I-N-D. Anyway,
Never heard that word before.
it's because it's old.
Wind.
Wind.
Little kids say go.
Yeah. Adon is the second aorist form for, well, even though it says both blepo and orao. Blepo is I see and orao is I see. It's usually classified, which he says here, for orao, second aorist of orao, because blepo has a first aorist, which is called blepsa. So just know that Adon, is second aorist for orao, and apon is second aorist for lego. So it's things that you have to memorize. Those are the ones that happen the most often. So I would recommend memorizing that, especially apon. Apon happens, especially in the Gospels, I don't know, countless times. And when you parse this, so if you see apon, you would parse it as a aorist, active, indicative, first, singular from, lego. Okay? That's how you would parse it.
So,
And so Adon would be aorist, active, indicative, first, singular from, orao.
aorist and imperfect, have we learned the active and indicative?
We've only learned middle too. So middle and passive last time. So it'd be present.
For aorist and
For right now, we've only learned active, but we're about to learn middle. Yeah. Okay. I do recommend writing that down and knowing it. So I'll leave that up there for a second. Okay, so there's a couple other irregular stuff that you need to know. I don't expect you to memorize it now, though. But the words ginosko and anabino do not form the second aorist according to normal pattern. So if you look on the left, singular plural, that's from ginosko. And if you look on the right, that's from anabino. And just something to be familiar with, and that is on page, what page is that on? 92. Any questions on that? So this is when you start wanting to have your vocabulary handy when you're doing translations, so you can compare and say, oh, wait, I've seen this before. This looks like it's probably an aorist of this, okay? And maybe on one of your vocabulary sheets later, you can write at least these two down. So you can at least recognize that they go for these words, okay? Because they may pop up in exercises, I don't know. I haven't thought about it yet. Again, the only way you're truly going to know without knowing the word is looking it up. So that's the helper. So here is the aorist tense. Elusa, elusas, eluse, elusamen, elusate, elusan. Again, if you were to translate this, you would just translate it as just a simple, like past tense, I loosed, I destroyed. You loosed, you destroyed. They loosed, they destroyed. You wouldn't add the I am or I was. It's just simply I loosed. However, in some contexts, you may want to supply the word have. I have loosed, but only use that when it makes sense. Because generally that's going to be for perfect. So everything that we covered is right here. So let's just say it together. Luo, lues, lue, luamen, luete, luusi, eluan, elues, elue, eluamen, eluete, eluan, elusa. Oh yeah, here, this might help you. Elusas, eluse, elusamen, elusate, elusan, elipan, elipes, elipe, elipamen, elipete, elipan. Tongue twister, right? Say that 20 times fast. So now we get to go back to chapter 11 and look at the middle. Passive. So this is going to be on page, starting at page 77 at the bottom. And do you remember the primary tenses? My, sai, tai, meta, ste, and tai. Remember all those? We learned them last time. Yep. Well, to make it easy, it's Greek's really similar. Main, sa, ta, meta, ste, and ta. It's really similar. So instead of a my, it's a main. Instead of a sai, it's a sa. Instead of a tai, it's a ta. And then right here, instead of a ntai, it's a nta. So just something to know, right? Which I actually printed out. Did I? I probably didn't hand them out, did I? So the imperfect tense in the middle and passive. So as long as you know the epsilon at the very beginning, which is a past tense morpheme, and you're just going to supply the tenses, the person number suffixes at the very end. So main, sa, ta, meta, ste, nta. You will probably notice that the second singular is going to be a little different, and which is another thing that you have to kind of be aware of. So, let's see right here. Can everyone see that okay? Do I need to zoom in?
What is that? And Omicron?
That's Omicron epsilon.
Instead of sigma?
Huh? So it's if you, yeah. So if you look at 11.4, that's under the second one under singular. So if you can't see it, easier. So we would, if you remember, a main sa ta, we would think a lu. Wait. Yeah. Hold on here. Think it through. Yeah, that's what it is. We would think that, elu essa. But the problem is, the only way I've ever heard it taught is the Greeks didn't really care for the sibilant sounds as much, so they dropped them sometimes. And then you have a epsilon and a omicron. And so when epsilon and omicron contract, they make the oo sound. So it'd be a...
Like feud.
Yeah. So it'll be elu, 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 elu. Got it? So that happens a lot. So maybe something to memorize too. But when we get to chapter 17, you'll know all that stuff. So yeah, I feel like I wouldn't need to actually explain too much on how it's made up. After explaining that there's a past tense morpheme, there's the lexical morpheme, the neutral morpheme, which is just there for phonological reasons, and the person number suffix. So elu amen is the epsilon is the past tense, lu is the lexical morpheme, the omicron is the neutral morpheme, and the main is the person number suffix. And basically, everything that we learned last time, those 5 ways to translate this is the exact same way, except for being past tense. So instead of what is it? Instead of I was loosing or I was being loosed, it would be, or I am being loosed, it would be I was being loosed. Make sense? And so, if you remember, what is the first one that we learned from chapter 9? For the ways you can translate at the middle. Do you remember? It's going to be on page 66. Yep, reflexive, which is, how would you translate the reflexive? For the first one, elu amen. I was what?
I thought it was by myself.
That would be the intensive. Yeah.
Or I was loosing myself.
So the reflexive would be I was loosing, myself. That would be the reflexive. The intensive would be I myself was loosing. The indirect would be I was loosing for myself. And then what's the last one, reciprocal, which wouldn't be applicable because that's not a plural. Elu amen.
I was losing us.
Yeah. Except there's no us and I.
Oh, you got 2 personalities.
Yeah. Does that make sense? So it's basically everything you learn in chapter 9. Just be the same, except for you would just make it past tense. Instead of I am, I was. Instead of you are, you were. Instead of he is, he was. Pretty simple. Any questions on that? Okay, there's middle. Same thing. Main, sa, ta, meta, ste, nta. Exact same thing. And right now we're only looking at the middle. And honestly, the reason why we're only looking at the middle is because there's actually a different thing that happens to the passive, which we'll learn that next time. Yeah. So, I have both second aorist and first aorist up here. First aorist is on the top. You'll see that the saw is there, but you'll notice that the second singular is different. And the reason why is because we would expect spete elusasa. But they didn't like that. So what they did is they dropped out the sigma, and how did they word it in this book? Page 90. Yeah, the alpha contracts with the omicron, and that makes a omega. So yeah, so it'll be eluso. It's just a contracting thing. So for aorist, you'll most likely see the omega at the end for the second person singular. Got that? So this is the reason why you learn the main sa ta meta ste nta is to know that there's changes that happen when certain syllables are dropped, which happens to be the sigma. And so like the imperfect middle, it was, what was it? Top of my head. It was elu'u. And here it's eluso. So you have to explain why is it different. And the reason why grammarians said is because the sigma drops and the contraction happens with the vowels. That's basically how they go about doing it. Yeah. And so everything that you know about the middle from chapter 9 applies to the aorist form also. It's pretty simple in that sense. So if we do elu sa main, the reciprocal, intensive, indirect, and actually it's reflexive, wasn't it? Hope if I know it. Yeah, reflexive, yeah. So that would be I loosed myself. I myself loosed, and I loosed for myself. Pretty simple. You want to do any exercises on that, or you think you're good? Okay, so lastly, we're just going to look at the uses. So the imperfect, there's 5 main uses on how it could be translated. Generally, it's just something that's been described as progressive in the past. So instead of I am doing something, I was doing something. So the example here under 1 on page 79 is he was listening to the teacher instead of he is listening. Okay, so it's just past tense, he was. The second one is the imperfect can also describe action that occurred regularly or ordinarily in past time. This is called the customary imperfect. I'm not expecting you to know all these, but this is something that he used to. Mainly it's the used to part. He used to listen, or he used to loose, whatever the verb happens to be. Then there's repetitive, which can also happen in the present. So instead of saying I go on listening, it would be I kept on listening. So you're just basically putting in the past tense. So here, number 3, the example is he kept on listening to the teacher. Number 4, the tendential imperfect indicates that an action was attempted but not actually performed. So it's the word try is usually applied. So he was trying to listen to the teacher. And the 5th one, A fifth use of the imperfect describes an action as continuing in the past time but focus on the beginning of the action. So the word began is usually implied. So he began listening to the teacher. Now, honestly, number one is the one that's going to happen the most. He was listening. It's just 9 times out of 10 it's going to be that. But if you look at the paragraph after number 5, it says, all of the above examples are expressed by one imperfect tense construction in Greek. Ekue, ton, didaskalon. So all those 5 translations come from that one sentence right there. Pretty crazy, right? So this is where context is the most important thing. And honestly, it's the biggest thing to keep in mind is this context, context, context. And the basic level of meaning happens in the paragraph. So if you're just translating a sentence, what I would do is translate the sentence, and as you're learning the paragraph, and as you're continuing on translating, then you're like, okay, maybe I need to reword or rethink how I translated the first sentence. You're just getting the whole context in place. So sometimes it's a little bit of thinking through how does this all fit together. So that's fun. So the uses of the aorist tense, which is back in chapter 13, which you don't really need to turn there, it's really the most common so aorist is the most common one out of all, completely, in the New Testament. So that's what you're going to see 9 times out of 10. Well, not 9 times out of 10, probably like 5 or 6 times out of 10. Let's read it. Just edging out of the present tense in total number of occurrences. Both the imperfect and aorist are secondary tenses in the indicative mood. They describe action that is taking place in past time. The difference between the two tenses is in the kind of action they describe. In contrast to the imperfect, which views the action as ongoing, aorist is just summary. So that's mainly what you need to know. It's just a snapshot. Where imperfect would be like you're watching a movie. Aorist would be there's a picture. And the thing that you have to kind of be aware of is, I don't know, you probably haven't heard it yourself, but some commentators or some pastors, as they would preach, they would say the aorist means complete, once and for all, done. And really that's not the case. It's just saying what it is. It has no time involved. It doesn't tell you when it happened or how it happened. It just says it happened. And that's really what you just need to know. It doesn't mean it's been complete. It just means it's been, this is what this person says has happened. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's really all that is. And questions on all that? Pretty simple? No? Okay. For vocabulary, since it's on 2 different pages, or actually I handed it out to you. It's on the handout. I would highlight those. So it's getting kind of hard. What do you guys would prefer to start translating? The Gospels or maybe the epistles, like Paul's writings? Any of them's good? Okay. So remember how I said erkamai looks different in other forms? Well, that's another one that looks different if you look at it. Erkamai, then go over to the right. Ilthon, sounds different, looks different, everything.
Why is there 2 for
2 for I saved? What do you mean?
Right.
There's sozo, which is I.
There were 2 I saved, and then there's 2 for.
Well, those are actually not for. This is esosa, which is I saved, and these 2 right here are for pharaoh.
Oh, okay. So why are there 2 for I4 or I4?
Because there's 2 different ones. So this one has both first and second aorist, I believe.
Oh. Oh, and then the same thing for I heard or I sinned.
Yeah.
It's actually for I sinned.
Yes, I sinned. So you see the eta sigma alpha. So the sigma alpha is going to be the first aorist. There's no sigma alpha in this one, so that's just going to be the second aorist.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
So those are the only ones that have second aorist are the ones we're going to go over, or the only ones we need to know?
No. So like Aelthon right here from Erchomai, it's going to be second aorist. Apon, second aorist. You just have to look.
Oh, those are the only words with both.
That you know so far.
That we know so far.
Yeah.
And on this, I'm talking about this list.
Oh yes, that you know so far. Yes.
Okay, cool. Got it.
Yep.
That was
Yep. So homework. So I couldn't find anything for imperfect on the last one, so I had to break this up. Usually don't like doing that, but on page 80, just number 3 and 8. Okay, and then on page 94, it's 6 and 13. Okay.